Welcome back to the Deep Dive. This is the show for you, the learner who needs to get up to speed quickly, but also really understand the details. We know that sometimes the most important stuff, especially with legal things, it's buried under just layers of jargon, right? Dense language. So our job is to dig that out for you, explain it, and make it stick. And today we are diving deep into something really critical and honestly pretty intense. It's excerpts from the Texas Penal Code, Chapter 20A. Trafficking of persons.
Yeah, this is definitely not light reading. If you ever wondered how a state legally defines, modern slavery or this kind of organized crime, Chapter 20A is where Texas lays it all out. State laws like this, they're meticulous. They don't just say something's illegal. They map out the entire criminal operation. Everything from the psychological tricks used for control right up to the really severe punishments depending on where it happens or who the victim is. So our mission today, it's pretty clear. We're going to break down this dense legal text. We want to give you clear, usable insights.
We'll focus on how the law actually defines trafficking, how it recognizes these methods of control, the psychological ones, and how it aims to punish every single part of the chain severely. But before we jump in, just a quick word. First, thank you for listening, seriously. And if you find this kind of focused analysis helpful, the kind that cuts through the noise, please take a second right now and subscribe to the channel. Your support, it honestly makes a huge difference. It helps us grow, reach more people, and tackle more complex topics like this one. And while you're at it, maybe check out our website. We'll have related materials, resources, maybe even the transcript for today's deep dive up there.
Okay, so setting the stage, Chapter 20A. It basically outlines all the key definitions and the specific crimes related to getting forced labor, forced services, or forced sexual conduct. You can think of this law almost like a surgical tool. It's designed to target every single link in the trafficking chain. The goal is to make it really hard for anyone involved in the exploitation to say, oh, I wasn't legally responsible.
Okay, let's unpack this. Right. First things first, definitions. In law, if you don't nail the definitions, you can't build a case. So let's start with the core action. What does it actually mean to traffic someone, according to Section 20A.01, subsection 4?
Well, the first thing you notice is how incredibly broad this definition is. Traffic means, get this, to transport, entice, recruit, harbor, provide, or otherwise obtain another person by any means.
Wow. Any means. So it's not just moving people across borders, not at all. Look at those verbs. Entice, recruit, harbor, provide. If you trick someone with a fake job offer, that's recruiting, that's trafficking.
If you rent out the apartment where a victim is held, that could be harboring or providing. Even just arranging the first contact might fall under otherwise obtain.
Okay, so the law is explicitly going after every single step in what you might call the supply chain of this crime.
Exactly.
The person making the fake job offer, the driver, the landlord renting the room, maybe even the person funding the operation who provides the resources. They're all potentially caught.
That's precisely the point. It stops people on the edges from claiming they were just, handling logistics or something minor. It recognizes that trafficking is usually an enterprise. It takes different roles. And defining traffic this broadly lets the state go after the whole network, not just the obvious bad guy doing the worst violence.
Okay, so that establishes the act of trafficking. What about the goal? The law seems to split this into two main outcomes. The first one is forced labor or services, defined in Section 20A.0112. How does the law separate this from just, regular work?
The key phrase is that the labor or services are obtained through the actor's use of force, fraud, or coercion.
Right. Force is pretty obvious. Physical violence.
Yep. And fraud, like that fake job offer we talked about, that's also fairly clear. Lying, deception. But it's that third word, coercion, where the law gets really sophisticated. It shows a deep understanding of how modern exploitation actually works.
And this seems like where we really need to dig in, because the law in Section 20A.011A goes into incredible detail about what coercion means. It's not just threats, is it?
Not at all. This definition is fascinating because it moves way beyond physical threats. It focuses on creating dependency and control. It recognizes psychological chains, not just physical ones.
Okay, let's break down those specific points in the definition. Point A is about controlling documents.
Right. Coercion includes destroying, concealing, confiscating, or even just threatening to withhold someone's government records or ID, passports, driver's licenses, birth certificates.
And you can immediately see the impact of that, right? If you're an immigrant or just someone far from home losing your ID, it basically paralyzes you.
Completely. You can't legally work, you can't travel easily, you often can't get help from authorities without raising suspicion yourself. It's a very powerful, non-violent way to trap someone.
It's like a lock and key, but made of paperwork. The law sees that as coercion. It does. Then there's detail point B, chemical impairment. This says coercion includes causing someone to become intoxicated, like drugging them without their consent.
And crucially, it has to be to a degree that it impairs their ability to judge the situation or resist what's happening.
So this directly addresses using drugs or alcohol to control victims, make them compliant, maybe make it impossible for them to legally consent to anything, whether it's work or sexual acts.
Exactly. It's recognizing chemical assault as a specific tool of coercion in trafficking. But then look at detail point C. This one it's really telling. It's almost the flip side, withholding substances.
Okay, this is where it gets really interesting, like you said. The law says coercion also includes withholding alcohol or a controlled substance from someone who is chemically dependent on it.
Yeah. Withholding it to the point that their withdrawal, impairs their ability to think clearly or resist doing what the trafficker wants.
Wow. That's incredibly specific.
It is. And it's sobering. It shows the lawmakers understood how traffickers weaponize addiction. If someone is dependent, threatening to cut them off creates this immediate, overwhelming leverage. The victim complies not because of a punch, but because of the sheer physical and mental agony of withdrawal. The law makes exploiting that dependency itself an act of coercion.
It really highlights how the law is trying to target vulnerability. It forces us to see that coercion today isn't always a gun. Sometimes it's exploiting a weakness, an addiction, a dependency.
And that focus on vulnerability runs right through the rest of this chapter. Section 20A.01 also quickly defines specific victim types that trigger much higher penalties later on. There's child, simply meaning someone under 18, and disabled individual, which points to another part of the law defining specific, serious physical or mental disabilities.
So right from the start, the definitions signal that exploiting minors or people with disabilities is treated with zero tolerance, which definitely sets the stage for the penalties we'll get to later.
Okay, let's move into Section 28.02. This is where we find the actual crimes, the core offenses. Subsection A lists, 8 different ways someone can commit trafficking. Let's start with the basic labor one, subsection A1, right? A1 is the foundation. You commit the offense if you knowingly traffic someone. Remember that broad definition. Recruit, harbor, transport, etc., with the intent that the person engages in forced labor or services. So it combines the act of trafficking with the goal of exploiting their work through force, fraud, or coercion.
But you mentioned earlier the law targets the whole operation. That seems to bring us to subsection A2, which is about profiting from the crime. Who is this aimed at?
This is designed to catch people who might not get their hands dirty with the actual trafficking or coercion, but they knowingly benefit from it. It says it's an offense to receive a benefit from participating in a venture involving forced labor if you knew or should have known the labor was forced.
So maybe like a manager at a company or an accountant, if they know the workers are being forced maybe through coercion and they still take their salary or bonus that comes from that work, they could be guilty of trafficking.
Exactly. Even if they never met the victim or used force themselves, the law is criminalizing the economic engine behind it. It's saying that money is dirty, and if you knowingly take it, you're part of the crime.
It attacks the profit motive directly.
Precisely. It tries to make forced labor economically toxic for everyone involved, not just the person holding the metaphorical whip. Okay, so that covers forced labor, both the act and the profit. Now the law turns to, the other major form of exploitation, sexual exploitation. That's subsections A3 and A4. Let's look at A3. First, trafficking with the intent to cause sexual conduct. This covers trafficking someone and using that force, fraud, or coercion to make them engage in specific prostitution-related activities. And what's really significant here is how it pulls in a whole list of other existing sus-crime statutes. It shows that trafficking isn't seen in isolation. It's a gateway or a tool for committing other serious crimes.
Can you give us a sense of what kinds of related crimes we're talking about here? You said it's a long list. It is. It links trafficking directly to things like standard prostitution, but also promoting prostitution, and importantly, even online promotion of prostitution, recognizing the role of the internet.
It also includes the more severe forms, like aggravated promotion of prostitution and compelling prostitution. Basically, if the trafficking is done in order to make someone commit or be subjected to any of these, the trafficking offense itself is committed.
And then just like with labor, subsection A4 addresses the benefit and the demand side for sexual exploitation.
That's right. It mirrors the labor section. It's an offense to receive a benefit from participating in one of these prostitution ventures defined at 3. But then it adds something really powerful. It also makes it an offense to actually engage in sexual conduct with a person who you know or should know has been trafficked in this way.
So the person paying for sex, the client, the John, if they knew or should have realized the person was a trafficking victim, they're not just getting a minor solicitation charge, they could be charged with the serious felony of trafficking themselves.
Exactly. It's a huge legal distinction. It makes the buyer potentially guilty of the trafficking offense itself, not just a lesser crime. The idea is to attack the demand that drives sex trafficking by imposing a major felony penalty on the end user, the consumer of the crime. Wow. Okay, so these first four subsections, they lay out the basic framework. Trafficking for labor, profiting from it, trafficking for sex, and then profiting from or consuming that forced sex. Seems like a pretty tight net already.
It is. But then the law significantly raises the stakes when vulnerable victims are involved. Right, now we get into the sections with the most severe consequences automatically built in. That's subsections A, 5 through 8. These all focus specifically on trafficking children or disabled individuals.
Let's start with trafficking these groups for labor, covered in A5. So A5 is trafficking a child or disabled person for forced labor, and X is receiving a benefit from that. But there's a crucial note attached here, isn't there? Something about knowledge. Yes, and this is probably one of the single most important protective parts of the whole chapter. It explicitly states the offense is committed regardless of whether the trafficker knew the victim was a child or knew they were disabled.
Okay, hold on. That's huge. It means I didn't know she was only 17 or I didn't realize he had that disability is not a defense.
Correct. Ignorance is removed as an excuse for these specific offenses. The law puts the full burden of risk onto the perpetrator.
Why is that so critical for actually prosecuting these cases?
Think about it. Traffickers often isolate victims, control information. Proving exactly what was in the trafficker's head about the victim's age or condition can be incredibly difficult for prosecutors. By removing that knowledge requirement for the enhancement, the law simplifies prosecution. But more importantly, it sends a powerful message. If you engage in this kind of predatory behavior, you take the risk. If your victim turns out to be a child or disabled, you face the maximum penalty, period. No excuses about what you thought you knew. It's basically applying strict liability to the victim's status in these enhanced categories. Okay, now let's move to what seem like the most severe offenses in the entire chapter, A7 and 8. Trafficking children or disabled individuals for sexual conduct.
Yeah.
This is where the law becomes incredibly punitive and cumulative. These sections apply when trafficking a child or disabled person causes them to engage in or become the victim of a whole catalog of other extremely serious crimes. It's not just referencing prostitution anymore. It connects the trafficking directly to some of the most heinous offenses in the Penal Code, especially those against vulnerable people. The penalties reflect absolute condemnation by the state.
We really need to understand the scope of harm here. Can you give us a breakdown of the kinds of underlying crimes listed in these sections?
Sure. The law seems to group them. First, you have the ongoing severe abuse crimes, like continuous sexual abuse of a young child. Horrific stuff. Then you have specific assault and indecency crimes. Things like indecency with a child, regular sexual assault, and aggravated sexual assault. That word aggravated always signals extreme violence, weapons, or serious injury.
And it doesn't stop there, right? It pulls in the prostitution offenses again, but also adds crimes related to, like, images and technology.
Correct. It loops back to include all those prostitution and promotion offenses we mentioned earlier, including solicitation. But then critically, it links trafficking to crimes involving creating or distributing exploitative material, specifically sexual performance by a child and possession or promotion of child pornography.
So the implication is, if a trafficker forces a child victim into creating child pornography, they're not just facing the pornography charge. They're facing that plus this enhanced trafficking charge, potentially leading to an incredibly long sentence.
Exactly. The state is building in maximum accountability by layering these charges. And just like before, subsection 8 makes it clear that receiving a benefit from these terrible ventures or engaging in sexual conduct with a trafficked child or disabled person is also this top-tier enhanced offense. Again, with no defense based on claiming you didn't know their age or disability. Okay, one more crucial piece in this section, subsection E of 20A.02. This deals specifically with defenses related to prostitution involving a child or disabled person. What's this trying to shut down? This is vital for protecting the victim during a trial. It says it is not a defense for the trafficker to claim that the child or disabled victim somehow had the culpable mental state for prostitution, basically, that they couldn't legally consent anyway or were somehow responsible. And it also says it's not a defense that the actual act of prostitution wasn't fully completed, so the law is saying loud and clear. The child or disabled person is the victim, period, regardless of whether they were manipulated into seeming compliant or whether the planned transaction actually finished. The focus stays entirely on the exploiter's actions. Precisely. It cuts off legal arguments that try to shift blame onto the victim or get bogged down in whether the final act occurred. It reinforces their victim status unequivocally. So we've established that trafficking is often not just a one-off event. It can be an ongoing criminal business. The law seems to address this directly with a separate offense. Continuous trafficking of persons in Section 28.03. That's right, this targets the pattern, the systemic crime. A person commits continuous trafficking if they commit the underlying trafficking offense from Section 28.02 two or more times over a period of 30 days or more. And this can be against one victim multiple times or against multiple victims.
What's the practical advantage for prosecutors in having this specific continuous charge instead of just charging, say, two separate trafficking incidents?
It allows them to charge one single, extremely serious felony that captures the whole pattern of abuse, the whole criminal enterprise, rather than just isolated snapshots. This is huge for going after organized rings where the exploitation might last months or even years. It ensures the potential sentence reflects the sustained nature of the crime, not just individual moments.
Okay, and charting this pattern leads to some interesting rules about how it's prosecuted, especially for juries. Subsection 28.03b talks about jury agreement. How does that work? Proving exact dates for months of abuse must be hard. It's incredibly hard. So this rule is designed to make prosecuting these long-term cases more feasible. For a continuous trafficking conviction, the jury doesn't have to unanimously agree on the specific date or the specific instance of trafficking conduct. They only need to agree unanimously that the defendant did engage in the pattern at least two offenses over that 30-plus day period. It stops the defense from derailing the case just by poking holes in a victim's memory about precise dates from a long time ago.
Makes sense. Now, the law also has to balance things. You want to stack charges if multiple crimes happened, but you don't want to punish someone twice for the exact same act. How do the rules on concurrent charges in 28.02cd handle that? Well, 28.02c makes it clear. If the trafficking conduct also counts as another crime, like, say, kidnapping or assault, the person can be prosecuted for both. The charges stack up.
But then 28.03c puts in a safeguard specifically for the continuous trafficking charge. It's basically a double jeopardy protection within this context.
And how does that protection work? You can't be convicted of both an individual trafficking offense under 28.02 and the continuous trafficking offense under 28.03 if they cover the exact same period of conduct against the same victim. Unless, maybe, the individual offense happened outside the time frame of the continuous pattern, or if the charges are presented as alternatives like convict on one or the other. It ensures fairness while still allowing prosecution for the overarching pattern.
Got it.
Okay, last part of this section, Section 28.04. This sounds very practical. It's about testimony and immunity for accomplices. Why is this needed? Well, in complex criminal enterprises like trafficking rings, often the only people who truly know what happened are other people involved in the crime, maybe lower-level players. So Section 28.04 allows the state to compel a party to the offense, an accomplice, to testify and provide evidence against others.
And what does the accomplice get in return for being forced to testify?
Immunity. They generally can't be prosecuted for the specific crimes they testify about, based on that testimony. The evidence they give can't be used against them in most cases. So it's the classic trade-off. Let a smaller fish go to catch a bigger one. Essentially, yes, but there's a crucial exception. The immunity doesn't cover perjury. If they lie under oath, they can still be prosecuted for aggravated perjury. And here's a really critical rule for trials found in 28.04c. A conviction for trafficking can be based on the uncorroborated testimony of an accomplice.
Uncorroborated, meaning just the accomplice's word is enough, even without other physical evidence backing it up. Why is that allowed here?
Because trafficking happens in secret. There often isn't physical evidence, like fingerprints or surveillance video for the specific acts of coercion or the planning. The main evidence is testimony from the victim and from insiders. If prosecutors always needed independent corroboration for accomplice testimony in these cases, many convictions would be impossible. This rule reflects the practical reality of prosecuting hidden, organized crime, making it feasible even when the only witnesses are involved parties.
All right, let's talk consequences, the penalties. For just the basic trafficking offense, say, trafficking an adult for labor, no kids involved, no serious injury, what's the starting point, the default penalty level?
Generally, the baseline offense under Section 28.02b is a felony of the second degree, which is serious, don't get me wrong, but honestly, given all the factors built into this chapter, many, if not most, actual trafficking cases quickly get elevated to a felony of the first degree.
Okay, and first-degree felony in Texas, that's the highest level before capital murder, right? We're talking potentially 5 to 99 years, or even life in prison. That's a massive jump. What triggers that immediate severe elevation? You mentioned 4 main categories. That's right. First, and maybe the most common trigger, any offense that involved a child or a disabled individual. So any crime under subsections A, 5, 6, or 8 is automatically a first-degree felony. Remember, that's regardless of whether the traffickers knew their status. Okay, victim status is number 1. What's second?
The outcome. If the trafficking resulted in serious bodily injury to the victim, or if the victim died as a result of the trafficking offense, it's elevated to first degree.
Third, a very specific tragic outcome. If the trafficking resulted in the death of an unborn child of the trafficked person, that also triggers the first-degree felony penalty. And the fourth category seems to focus on the trafficker's specific actions during the crime.
Yes, this includes using or even just showing a deadly weapon, standard enhancement, but it also specifically calls out impeding breathing or circulation, basically, choking or smothering the victim. The law recognizes how dangerous that specific act is.
And wasn't there something in that fourth category about where the victim was recruited from?
Absolutely. If the traffickers recruited, enticed, or got the person from a place specifically meant to be a refuge, like a shelter for runaways, foster kids, homeless people, or victims of domestic violence, sexual assault, or even other trafficking victims, that's an automatic first-degree felony. Same if they recruited someone from inside a correctional facility. Preying on people in vulnerable situations or places of refuge is seen as particularly heinous. Okay, so those are the ways it gets bumped up to a first-degree felony. But then there are 2 specific situations that trigger the absolute maximum penalty range: life imprisonment or a minimum of 25 years up to 99 years. What's the first one? Continuous trafficking. That offense we discussed under Section 28.03, if convicted of that pattern of trafficking over 30 days or more, the penalty is automatically in that highest range life for 25 to 99 years. It reflects the severity of sustained organized exploitation.
And the second way to get that life 25 to 99 sentence, this is the location-based enhancement, right? The 1,000-foot rule in Section 28.02b-1.
That's the one. This is a powerful statement by the legislature. The offense gets punished with that maximum range if any part of the crime, the recruitment, the harboring, the exploitation itself, happened on the premises of, or even just within 1,000 feet of, certain protected locations.
1,000 feet? That's like 3 football fields. It creates these huge safety zones. What places get this level of protection?
It's a really extensive list, clearly aimed at protecting kids and vulnerable people. It includes schools, school bus stops, even the pickup and drop-off zones, also college campuses, institutions of higher education, juvenile detention centers, and crucially, all those shelters and residential centers we mentioned before for runaways, foster kids, homeless, victims of trafficking, domestic violence, sexual assault.
And community centers for youth, child care facilities, even school events.
Yep. Community centers with youth programs, licensed child care facilities, official school functions, even University Interscholastic League, UIL events. The message is crystal clear. Trafficking activity anywhere near these places is considered one of the worst possible variations of the crime, justifying the state's harshest non-capital punishment. It's meant to keep exploiters far away from children and people already in crisis. The message is crystal clear. The message is crystal clear. Hashtag outro. Wow. Okay, that was incredibly detailed. We've really dissected how Texas law approaches human trafficking in Chapter 20A. If we try to boil down the biggest takeaways from this deep dive, what really stands out? Maybe 3 key things. I think the first, for me, is how the law explicitly recognizes that coercion today is often psychological. Defining coercion to include things like controlling documents or exploiting chemical dependency, that's huge. It means manipulators can't hide behind the fact they didn't use physical violence.
Right. The psychological chains are treated as real chains. Okay, second big takeaway.
The absolute protection given to children and disabled individuals, elevating the crime automatically and, crucially, removing the trafficker's knowledge of their status as a defense. That puts victim protection front and center. It makes prosecuting those cases much more straightforward.
And third,
has to be the severity of the penalties, especially those maximum life 25 to 99-year sentences. Triggering those for continuous trafficking targets the ongoing criminal business model. And triggering them based on location, that 1,000-foot rule around schools and shelters, shows an absolute commitment to creating safe zones.
Yeah, the scope is just immense. It seems designed to leave no loopholes, catching everyone from the top boss benefiting financially down to the person driving the van or the person buying the sex.
Exactly. So maybe the final thought for you, the listener, to mull over is this. When you look at how meticulously this law defines control, especially the subtle psychological kinds, it really forces us to think about the line between legitimate influence or leverage in work or relationships and criminal exploitation. Understanding where that line is drawn legally and recognizing that coercion can be quiet, based on vulnerability, not always violence.
Yeah.
That's critical for spotting trafficking and abuse that might otherwise go unnoticed.
A really powerful point to end on. Thank you for walking us through that complex piece of legislation, and thank you for joining us for this deep dive. We'll see you next time.